intro by now. Into the Church, song number 350. Heart with loving heart united. Song number 350. Let's all stand, sorry. I forget like every time. Heart with loving heart united. Y'all may be seated. A story came to mind as they talked about the 50 cents is 50 cents. I wasn't going to share this, but there's an old couple one time that had always thought they wanted to go on this airplane ride. And I told this at Terry Hill one time. Do you guys remember? They wanted to go on an airplane ride, and well, it was too expensive for them, and they never did exactly spend the money. And eventually, someone told them about it, and or told the pilot about that. Hey, they know someone that's always wanted to do it, but they just never did it. And so he came to them and he said, "Hey, well, I will take you on the ride for free if you guys don't make a noise the whole flight." So they agreed to that. Yep. Okay, they're going to go on this plane, and it's probably one of the older planes, so it's not like an enclosed cab. And so anyhow, they're on this plane, and he starts doing different tricks and stunts with them and after they got back down on the ground, he asked through the radio if they enjoyed it, and I didn't even hear you at all. He's like, yeah, but how was that? I didn't hear you say anything. And he turned around and looked, and the husband was gone. He said, "Where's so-and-so?" He was like, "Well, you said if I make a peep, I'm going to have to pay the cost of the flight, and $10 is $10, so I didn't say anything." And I just thought it was funny. 50 cents is 50 cents. $10 is $10. But yeah, I think if your spouse flies out of a plane, you should probably say something. The greatest need in modern civilization is the development of communities where the heart of God is home, where the humble and wise learn to shepherd those in the path behind them, where trusting strugglers lock arms with others as together they journey on. It's a quote from Larry Crabb's book, Connecting. Well, you guys had homework last night. How many of you finished your homework? Did anyone finish their homework? You guys are all failing the class. All right. This is batch fail here. All right. Well, think about those things. If nothing else, someone should at least raise their hand. Like, we went over like at least 8 of them. Yeah. Things you did last night. All right. Well, that's all right. Think about that. I'll ask again tomorrow night. Hopefully someone does the assignment. And if you don't know what the assignment was, well, the 8 different things that help impact culture, just pick out one of them. Maybe it's a cross at Easter, or maybe it's having your children read The Pilgrim's Progress, or whatever else, a song or a text. It'd be a text, a song, a symbol, an image, a story, a hero, a practice, and a tradition. I'm going to summarize my final thoughts on culture, and with that, it leads into the next segment of sorts. Okay, so Val Yoder wrote an article in the Anabaptist Vision in IGO's newsletter titled "The Anabaptist Vision for Today," and so I'm going to take some snippets out of that. I'm going to be talking about church in Gallatin Heights tonight, and so we're going to be looking at that in more detail. Well, he says, historically, Anabaptists have been given 2 labels. During the Reformation, our spiritual ancestors were called the Radicals. They're a proactive group on the cutting edge of a determined effort to bring the church back to their biblical foundation in Acts. They initiated discussion, evangelism, and took Christ's command, "Go therefore and teach all nations," literally. The ambition and intensity of this time not only earned them the title radical, but also ignited the fires of persecution and wrathful animosity against their simple faith. Years later, some of the heat of religious hatred toward them dissipated. As the next generation reflected on the cruelty and brutality upon their forefathers and found places of political refuge, they developed a maintenance mode of church life. There was a concerted effort to preserve that which the forefathers had died for. Holding fast to the faith became the theme in their places of refuge from the intolerant magistrates of Europe. They became known as the quiet in the land. The radicals and the quiet in the land are both essential titles and represent 2 callings of church life. Okay, he's not discounting one or the other. Represent 2 callings of church life. The church is called to be proactive while maintaining the faith. And so today, as we look around, it feels like there's always or it seems to be, that there's a compromise in one of these 2 areas, right? Being proactive or maintaining the faith. We are to teach. We are to go, teach all nations while holding fast to the faith. As a contemporary, speaking about himself, and a Baptist and an Anabaptist, I am grateful for a heritage that has done well in maintaining application, while most other denominations have compromised to the point of invisibility. I recall going to a Sunday school, and I do not remember this time frame. Okay, this is before my time. But he recalls going to a Sunday school as a child in mission church, where Lutheran ladies would not come to church unless they were veiled, usually with a stylish hat. And I'm sure some of you remember that. Okay, how many of you remember that? Okay, it's good. Walter Beecher reports that in his grandmother's day, the Amish and the Methodist ladies looked nearly the same from across the street. It was only with a closer look that you would see the frills and extra lace not worn by the Amish holding fast in our church, and has visibly prepared a biblical obedience that has been lost in my other denominations. I wonder if I skipped something there. Doesn't sound quite right. As important as maintenance is, it must proactively cooperate with passionate action. If our holding fast is not coupled with go ye therefore, Anabaptism will become extinct, except as a spectacle for tourism. We will be a little more than a quaint reminder of Western culture's past. So maybe to summarize his thoughts there quickly, he gives 2 sides of it: a maintain or a maintenance mode of church life, and a proactive mode of church life, which he would refer to as going therefore. He then says this: middle-aged American Anabaptists must capture a vision of kingdom building that calls forth the wisdom of the aged. Okay, there is wisdom in the older people. Okay, it's part of life. More experience is usually good. Okay, And then obviously, and then he says, and the daring of the young. This vision must include both the maintenance of faith and the proactive aggression of works. So there's a combination here. Our challenge involves holding fast while we go therefore. And it seems like today, people, again, I said this before, but they compromise. They start going therefore, or they compromise in like the two ditches when they start trying just to maintain the faith. And so I'm focusing primarily on creating community in the last two sessions because I think it's similar to the presentation, the performance, and the preconditioning problem. I think there's probably something underneath it. And I wonder if we don't have as much of a go ye therefore mentality because we think we would be more of an island working by ourselves to bring the gospel than as a team of people working to preach the gospel. And so maybe that has reflected a little bit on our idea of missionaries. Okay, we call some people missionaries, when in reality we're all missionaries of the gospel. Or maybe it's we don't know how we could do it over there, right? It's hard here, right? In some ways, it's hard here, living out the Christian life. But then when we think about going into another culture, it's even harder. So I would say this as I kind of finish up the summary of culture. I think God starts on the inside and works out. And I keep going back to the clean cup and the wall and the foundation of Jesus Christ. It starts with a heart connection to Jesus, who creates love. And this love creates a heart connection to those around us. This heart connection allows others. This heart connection gives us a heart connection to others and allows us to feel connection for all the world. And so some people would say, well, I could never, and then fill in the blank, right? Well, I could never live there. I could never do that. I could never. And you can name it for yourself. But I think when we do that, if we say we can never be a missionary in that culture or do X, Y, or Z, we're underestimating what God can do through you, okay? I think that's a limiting aspect of God as we think about going therefore. And I'm assuming, though, we all know that when a young couple starts dating, sometimes they'll do anything to be with the other person, right? And so the reality is, if God is living in us, he can empower us to do the things that he's called us to. And so we can't underestimate God as we think about that. Jesus' love transforms us, and then it overflows from the inward out. Basic, but it's true, okay? Inside out. We can't have the outside clean and the inside dirty. Jesus says multiple times in Matthew and Mark and some of the other Gospels, he says this, and he talks about this, and then there's something that happens after it. Well, Matthew 9:36, but when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then we have another example, Matthew 14:14. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude and was what? Moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Matthew 15:32. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. I will not send them away. Matthew 20:34. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Okay? And there's more references. I'm not going to go through. I think there's like some 20-some references about compassion in the New Testament. I'm not going to go through all of them, obviously. But Jesus, being moved with love, did something, right? And so love is an action word, and we probably, maybe we take it for granted sometimes, but we think we know what love is, right? But if I would say I love my wife, and she really wants that little bit of slushy or root beer in the bottom of my cup, and she wants it and I want it, well, if I love her, it creates an action. Well, hey, here you go. You know what? Enjoy it. You might always want to, okay? It's not that, so if we take the earlier Anabaptist approach to radicalism, it's not that it's always something that we want to do wherever God might call us, but there's that spirit of offering ourselves up. We'll talk about that spirit of Gelassenheit in a little bit. And again, let's go back to 1 Corinthians 13 as we think about love is given to us by Jesus. So we did that the other night, right? Went to the love chapter. Love is given to us by Jesus. And I think the majority of us in the local body have a heart connection to Jesus, right? I think we're desiring him. I had said, go there. I was referring to what I went to earlier. So if you want to turn there, great. We're going to get in our Bibles in just a second. But yeah. So I think the majority of us would say yes. The reason we're here is to grow in worship, instruction, and fellowship, and evangelism amongst the church and growing closer to God. We have love for Jesus, or you probably wouldn't even be here to start. And we wouldn't be trying to grow in our knowledge of our Savior and do summer Bible school or whatever else you do to draw closer to Him. That's an evidence of your lifestyle, right? Being here is an evidence of your lifestyle. But as we think about being part of a church and living out the spirit of Gelassenheit, it starts with the ground, inward out, right? From the ground up, the foundation. Jesus Christ. The heart connection with Jesus must be first and foremost. Or Gelassenheit, I'll refer to it in just a little bit. Heart connection with Jesus or Gelassenheit with Jesus. And then that gives us the love to love those around us. And then in turn, gives the heart connection and being moved with compassion to the rest of the world. And so heart connection with Jesus, heart connection with others, and heart connection for the world. If you do it any other way, it becomes a mess. Jesus gives us the love we love. We then love others around us as we love Him. He gives us more love, and it flows out to where we are moved with love for those who haven't heard. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow night in the word koinonia. But Jesus transforms us from the inside out, and we create a culture of love and care for those around us. So it goes to Jesus, comes back to us through the love that we receive of Him, and we spread it around to those around us. And if the heart connection for others isn't there, it's going to be hard to spread the love of Jesus outside our cultural boxes, okay? Because we're familiar with these things, but when we get to another culture, it's different. And so therefore, it's hard to then look on them with love or look on them with compassion. So as we think about the idea of going therefore, but also maintaining, there's a healthy tension, right? There should be a healthy tension between the two. As you think about maintaining our churches, but also living out the gospel and going therefore. And so someone had said this, or actually it was about something else, but I had a thought because I was thinking about church. And I would say this, is if there's never a tension when you talk as a church, whether it's about culture, a practical application, or something else, okay, if there's never a tension, when you talk as a church, maybe you settle to the area of complacency, where you're just like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. There should be a healthy balance, a healthy tension as we decide and strive after between the maintaining and going. And obviously we have community children here, and so that's good. But there's got to be a balance. And so we create a culture from which to grow the next generation. So that would be like the maintaining aspect. We want to maintain a culture and a lifestyle that helps bring them up. And that culture cultivates a love for God, others in the world, and then from there we go. So hopefully that makes sense. One brother told me last night, and it's a very true statement, but he says, convictions aren't passed on, right? Convictions aren't passed on. We can have our own convictions about something, and we can be thinking about why we're doing something as a parent or as a school teacher or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your students or people in the church will think the same way, or your children will think the same way. Just convictions aren't passed on. It's something that needs to be developed. And as they listen to the Spirit of God, that's how it starts. So why we need Christian culture and listen to the Spirit of Jesus Christ to maintain our churches while going therefore. Melvin Lehman gives us an idea in some of, I think it was Melvin Lehman, could have been John D., but Melvin Lehman, I think, says this in describing tension in church, okay? It's part of working with people, right? I'm sure you all could say you've all had an experience of some sort in church. It's just a tension there. A tension, a balance of maintaining and going therefore in church like this. Where he says there's two things. Well, there's melody and harmony. Okay? Melody and harmony. And melody is what some churches are. They try really hard to make everyone see the same way. And then there's some churches that are harmony. They produce a more beautiful song as they blend into one. Okay? And this would be more so of your own volition or your own voluntary service. So both churches, though, do have some dissonance. You all know what dissonance is, right? Is Mr. Gaiman here? Can you give us a quick rundown on what dissonance is?
Sounds that don't harmonize.
Yeah, sounds that don't harmonize, right? Me singing in the shower and something else, right? Or maybe two young children and they're trying to sing. And actually, it happened the other night on the way home. We commented, the children were singing, what was that song? I Have a Biblical Treasure, right? And our one child was getting way off. There's a little bit of dissonance there. They sang really, really loud, but it wasn't on tune. And so dissonance will show up. It might show up in churches. But dissonance in the song is okay, but it must cease. Okay? It'll be there. You don't want to listen to a whole song of dissonance. At least I don't. It's gonna show up, okay? We're working with people. We're working with each other, right? We want to be gracious. We want to be gracious, like we said the first night, but it will show up. Concept of dissonance brings us to the word for tonight, and that's Galossenheit. And so tomorrow night is Koinonia, but how many of you know the word Galossenheit? A few of you. How many of you heard the word to Anabaptist perspectives? Okay. How many of you listen to Anabaptist perspectives in general? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, well, you guys can turn in your Bibles to Philippians 2. Philippians 2, 1 through 5. Philippians 2, 1 through 5. I'm going to call on someone to read it again, so hopefully you all are turning there. Philippians 2, 1 through 5. Thomas, did I call on you yet? Did I call on you yet? Okay, go ahead once you get there. Philippians 2, 1 through 5. All right, so that text, I think, summarizes, in a way, the word Galossenheit. If you want, there's a lot of different things that go into the word Galossenheit, but I think if you go back to this text, this is what it looks like, in some ways, when you all are having a spirit of Galossenheit. And so let's say Galossenheit together, because I don't think a whole lot of us know it. Galossenheit, okay? Well, where does it come from? What is it? Well, it's a German word, and the idea is that it is central in the way Anabaptists understood the relationship to God and other people. Okay, there's two things: the relationship to God and other people. And so this concept of Galossenheit, I had mentioned Anabaptist Perspectives, episode 102. If you want to go look for it, Chester Weaver talked on it. But when I was thinking about these different things a number of years ago, it gave me another vision of what I think it looks like in God's community, when that Spirit is present. And so again, this is not all my thoughts. Obviously, I have thoughts in here, but some of it was from Chester Weaver and the Anabaptist Perspective episode. There is no single English word equivalent. Okay, it's a German word, but there's no single equivalent. There's nothing that's exactly the same, like this is that. And so there's about 17 or 18 words they use to parallel to the word. And so I would also say, if you want to think of Galossenheit, it would be a summary of the fruits of the Spirit. Would be one way to say it, I think. But here's the words, okay? Yieldedness, humility, calmness, composure, meekness, tranquility, imperturbability, serenity, poise, sedateness, letting go, relaxation, the opposite of self-assertion. It's a gentle spirit. It's a submission to God's will and brokenness, esteeming other people better than themselves, as in Philippians 2. It's the union and agreement of the inner experience with the outward response. And so the idea is we believe something, and then it's also happening on the outside. There's not like this dual lifestyle, if you want to think of it that way. It's also something that's caught, not taught. So, Chester Weaver then says this about Colossenite. It is the most compelling part of faith because it takes supernatural experience controlled by Christ to be yielded to God in the things that have happened to me in life and to others in life. And takes the power of God for you and I to work together because it is yieldedness, letting go, and relaxation. Okay? That is the part that I'm trying to convey as we think about Colossenite in church. You could say it's the dissonance ceasing, okay? The reality, probably out of, I don't know, 100 is what's the average Sunday here? 120? Give or take? Well, if you pick just 5 topics even, I'm guessing y'all not going to see the same, right? But it's that spirit of yieldedness, humility, meekness, lived out in the community. Where true communities, where the heart of God is home, where the humble and the wise learn to shepherd those in the path behind them, where trusting strugglers lock arms with others as together they journey on. And so he has a diagram, which I couldn't see it when I was watching him on YouTube, but he was explaining it, and so I don't know if it's exactly what he was thinking. But I think it's something similar to this as we think about Colossenite. Well, the Colossenite mentality helps humble ourselves in broken submission to God, to God's will, keeps tranquility, composure, and calmness in relation to others in the time of dissonance, where we in humble submission to God and others emulate what it looks like to be a community of believers where God is the king and the brother or sister a valued counselor. Okay, that's the hard part. When we don't all get together, the hard part is like when you're disagreeing with me and I'm disagreeing with you, is to look at each other as brothers and sisters that are a valued person in our lives and a fellow journeyer. So the brother and sister, a valued counselor and journeyer, and where the next generation and seekers, those who are looking for more, catch a vision of God's kingdom lived out here on earth. And so what's happening? Well, we have Colossenite with God. So I don't know if you guys can see it very well from where you're sitting, hopefully. But you have Colossenite with God, or a relationship with God, a yieldedness to his will, submission, a brokenness, tranquility. And him in return gives us a love. And then that flows out of us. And then from there, we have Colossenite between the brothers and sisters. And so if we would X out the Colossenite with God, it takes the Colossenite away with brothers and sisters. Okay? So the foundation, again, is a relationship with God. Chester Weaver says this, a Colossenite connection with God and others. Okay? So we work together as team members. I'm going off track here, but when you play basketball, you can have 5 talented guys, and they will always lose to a team that's of lesser talent, depending how big the talent gap, but when they work together. When teams work together, that's the dream work, as they say, right? So that's the reality here. A Colossenite connection with God and others provides security, protection, strength, resources, and continuity. And then he says, if there's no Colossenite with God, the result is exposure, which obviously when you have no Colossenite with God, you don't have the Colossenite with your fellow believers. Okay? The result is exposure, aloneness, weakness, vulnerability, and fragmentation. And so that would be the idea of individualism. Christian Burkholder was, I think he was from here, and then over the Revolutionary War moved. But he says this about Christian brotherhood. Love is the only bond of brotherhood. Where love is lacking, there is no other bond that is acceptable before God. So again, we can go back to 1 Corinthians 13. Hey, you're a Christian, yay. But you're like a clanging cymbal because you don't have love. Love is the only bond of brotherhood. Where love is lacking, there is no other bond that is acceptable before God. Does anyone have any comments before I move on? That's fine. What's the weakness with Colossenite? Well, if I would want my way, and I would tell you that you need to yield yourself to me, okay? Where we can use Colossenite as something and take advantage of someone else or other people, okay? A domineering or controlling spirit is not what we're talking about here. Not where you take advantage of other people, but it's the equality between us and that meekness and temperance together. So a reality. Jim Weaver says this, and as we think about maybe abusing people with spiritual power, spiritual abuse and the power, he says this: I agree that there is often spiritual pride in contending over viewpoints, and so this would be maybe application or cultural points. But once we tolerate everyone's interpretation of doctrine, Jesus and the Scripture no longer are the authority. Okay, if we have 130 people, and we all have different views, okay, we're not all going to call the shots. Okay, we're going to have to yield to each other. Jesus and Scripture no longer become the authority. Doctrine is simply what you believe that produces a lifestyle. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 12. So if you're at 1 Corinthians 13 or Philippians 2, go to 1 Corinthians 12, 18 through 25. 1 Corinthians 12, 18 through 25. Try to remember who did I not call on yet? I don't know all your names. Raise your hand. Hey, there you go. Is Ezekiel? Yes. Okay, go ahead. 1 Corinthians 12, 18 through 25, please.
But now hath God set members, every one of them, in the body as it pleased him. And if they were all one member, where were the body? But now are they many members, yet but one body. And the eye cannot say unto the hand, I have no need of thee, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Yea, much more, those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to the part which lacked. There should be no schisms in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another.
Okay, and obviously schisms there is like disputations or strife in the body. Okay. Well, I keep going back to it, but we have to remember that every single person, a part of the body, is valued. Okay, you all are valued. You all bring something to the table. And God has put every one of us as a different part. We're all part of the body, but not everyone will make the final decision. And we hopefully are okay with that. But sometimes it feels like, I want to do so-and-so or thus. Whether it's at school or church or at work, there's at some point someone makes a decision. And so no matter the part you play, we must esteem each other. And don't say your vision out of the eye is not helpful, or the hearing out of the ear is not helpful, or whatever the part is. So I guess I would just say, as you start to think about reinforcing Colossenite, hear each other. And I forget who said it. It's probably a common phrase as well, but you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. God made it that way for a reason. 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we're going to need to hear each other. Obviously the eye, the big toe, your elbow, okay, whatever part you play. And so if you feel like you're a feeble part of the body, you're just as necessary, okay? Hopefully no one's I'm forgetting an appendix. Okay, I don't think if we're thinking about that, you're not. I don't know if that's a part of the body that we thought about. But if you feel like you're a feeble part of the body or you don't have much to offer, don't let the devil tell you that. Ask yourself the question: what are your gifts? Okay, everyone has a gift of some nature. Okay, different areas in some people, different strengths in some areas than other people. but you all have something to add, whether you're really old, and I guess whether you're younger, right? We all have something to add. We need the daringness of the young and the wisdom of the elders. What are my gifts would be the first question, and then I have two other things. What can I do with my gifts? And maybe if you're asking about what are my gifts, what am I good at? Okay, start with that. What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? Well, hey, Deke is good at tech stuff. Okay, he has a gifting for that. Mr. Gaiman is a singer, I would say, right? And he has a gifting for that. Some of us don't as much for different things, and that's okay. But use your gifts. So what can I do with my gifts? And how can I fill in the gaps with my gifts would be the thought. So your friend in the body might not be as strong in some areas, but you can give counsel to him. Okay. Feel free to do that to each other. It's talked about in Scripture, but I think sometimes we'd rather just say nothing and look the other way. Colossenite reiterates Jesus' teaching of being weak and non-self-sufficient, and that produces a strength, right? When we are weak, we become strong, referring to Jesus, right, enabling us. But also the idea of yieldedness amongst each other. You know what? When we're hunting, and he's probably got a little more willpower than I do, but Johnny will send him to the top of the hill, okay? Whatever it might be, look at your gifts and realize that, you know what? If we're talking about hunting or hunting with each other, okay, it's a little off topic maybe, but some guys are built big and they're a lot stronger than a skinny school teacher, okay? That's just a reality. But that's a gift for some people, and so we use that. And then it says later on there in chapter 12, it says, God hath tempered the body so what? To fit neatly together, or unites the body as the individual parts. And so it's just a statement to Jesus and to others when you ask of them and you offer your gifts to each other. And he can use that. Well, what about the American context? Well, the Americans would say if you're referring to other people, that's a weakness. Colossenite to people in the world shows weakness because you're not domineering or you're not taking over them. But for Christians, it's a strength. And that's the upside down part of Jesus' teachings. Colossenite to people from the world is weakness. Why should I submit to someone else? Okay, I want to rule over them. No. Jesus says, hey, the last shall be first. Be a servant of all. But for Christians, it's a strength. American context. American individualism clashes with the Anabaptist theme of Colossenite or a yieldedness to God and His church. Okay, and that's what I was referring to in fragmentation. Americans want to do it of themselves, a self-made man or a self-made person, pulling yourselves up by the bootstrap. It's not what God conveys. It's not God and I, thinking about ourselves as an island. It's God and we, as a people, calling from the mainland to the people that are on the islands, and then we help hold each other's up and carry each other's burdens. If you feel at any time, and there'll probably be a time in life at some point where you feel like disengaging, we feel like pulling it back from maybe your local body or from a group of friends maybe, or whatever else might happen, push through it. Lean in. That's the time to lean into God. Lean into a relationship with Jesus. Okay, when we don't feel like doing something, that's probably the sign that we probably should do something. And so lean into God and His church. Frank Reed asked the question, well, why are so many of our people not able to deal with life? Why are so many people not able to deal with life and we have counseling centers? Now I'll say this, okay? This is, again, not on script, but counseling centers are helpful, okay? And we do need them. But why are so many people not able to deal with life? Is it because of American individualism on the rise? Is that because we've lost the value of relating deeply and we refer to each other and talk about things on a superficial or a top level? How's work? Good. How's school? Good. Whatever else. Is it because of individualism that creates the fragmentation of the cultural communities where youth and others struggle to piece together the clumsy reality? Okay, over the last 50 years, we've had lots of churches pop up, or how should I say, denominations or conferences maybe, things changing. It can be confusing. And so are we continuing? So as we think about Colossenite, are we continuing some of the things that would bring the spirit of yieldingness to each other, or the spirit of yielding one to another in submission to God and brokenness? Well, are we continuing brotherly and sisterly addresses instead of maybe gossip? Are we doing that? Hey, I saw this in your life, just thought I would check in with you. Or would we rather talk about it with your spouse and then let it at that? Or maybe it's talk about it to someone else. Are we still doing the brotherly and sisterly greetings? Okay, that refers to a sense of yieldedness. American culture doesn't do that. Okay, but I think it's something that reinforces the value and the practice of Colossenite, of yielding yourselves to each other. And I should also say this carefully. Ministry, don't just greet the ministry. Young people, don't just greet the young people. And friends, don't just greet friends. Okay? Sometimes when I was younger, when we were getting ready to do feet washing, I'd be like, all right, he's getting up where, right? And trying up right there, and then go. And young people, okay, that makes sense maybe. I'm not sure about everyone. But as brethren and sisters in the church, we should be willing and able to do it to everyone in the church. Exhorting one another and encouraging each other, maybe preferring one another with texts or helping out with food. Okay, that's one of our strengths of our culture, generally speaking. Maybe exchanging assets and tools and vehicles and different things. Again, you're preferring someone else. What happens if they break a tool? Well, then we'll talk about that later. No. Hey, on submission to each other. Church family gatherings, church family work days. These are all, hey, you know what? My time is valued. I want my Saturdays, right? I'm assuming you all do too. But can you go help someone else? Or are you too individualistic, so much so that we can't help someone else? Do we gather with a local body other times than just worship? Maybe it's just you only come to Sundays, or maybe you only come Wednesdays, or whatever. Maybe not only Wednesdays would be as common. But are you gathering together as a body of believers? Are we slowing down is another question, enough to hear the word of the Lord, and the voice of the Lord? Because if we're not hearing the voice of the Lord, if I would go back to our slide, and we don't have the Colossenite with God, that submission to God, that humbleness to God, it's not going to go as well with our view of church, the view of others, and those around us. You know the song that says, tread softly, a whisper is heard. My God and I walk through the fields together. Jesus and Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship. And so we have to come back to that. Anyone have any thoughts as I'm speaking? Or cool, that's okay too. I'm going to go a little bit further. Colossenite history. Well, we talked about the fact that it's a German word, and the Anabaptists use it in understanding the relationship between God and you all. Well, it was around since the medieval ages, so a long time ago. And then it pretty much disappeared out of usage around the early 1900s, like 1920s, 1930s, somewhere in there is when it started to be forsaken, the usage. And this was during what? The rise of American industrialism, individualism. And then in the church, it was replaced by what we would call fundamentalism. And so I quickly text my co-teacher, like, I don't want an internet definition. I want a local definition, one of our brotherhood. And he's a history teacher at Terry Hill, and he tried to boil it down. But he said it's a reductionist take to life where you boil it down to a couple of things and you do the fundamentals. And so then he gave an idea of, well, if you're thinking about nonconformity, you kind of turn it into a checklist of things to do rather than the spirit of the heart is what happened with fundamentalism. It also could be called evangelicalism. So if you want to think about that, well, if you play basketball, well, all you need to do is be good at defense and shoot threes. I tell my students, I'm a basketball coach, but I tell them, you do not need to shoot mid-range jumpers. Don't even shoot them. You really only need to make a three and a layup. That's all you need to do. And that's boiling it down maybe too much, but Make a three, make a layup. And well, you could just say, well, all you need to do is shoot threes, right? You can make 35% of your threes or make 3 points if you know the game of basketball. And someone can make 50% of their layups and you still beat them. So if you make 3.5 shots out of 10, you would win. But that's probably too much boiled down because there's so many other things that go into it. You need to know how to dribble and how to pass, right? If you're not good at that, you don't work well as a team, you could have one guy take the ball all the way up the court and shoot it. Cool. But he's probably going to be covered if he does that every time. And so fundamentalism or evangelicalism is summarized by Frank Reed as this. He says it's virtue signaling replaced actual virtue. The purity culture, and some of you guys would probably remember this, but it's a little older term. Purity culture replaced by actual purity. The recipe religion needs to be replaced with true religion. Rules and regulations were produced to replace heart conviction and character. And this gave rise to a codified life or approach to life. And if you follow the code, life will be good. Sadly, looking good and being good are not synonymous. And so, does fundamentalism help define maybe the conditions of the heart? Or we can say, hey, maybe this person's doing good or not doing good. Yeah, maybe. But the heart can only be known through relationship and community. Okay? You can have people where it looks like they're doing good, and something happens, and you say, where does that come from? Fundamentalism or evangelicalism, I should have put that up before. But you could say, well, where'd it come from? Well, maybe the fact that we have American individualism so strong, right? And our cell phones make it even more so. Maybe that being so strong is taking away the relationship amongst believers. Maybe that's where it's coming from. So when you are secure in Christ, and I'm secure in Christ, you don't threaten me when you come and say, hey, I saw this in your life. Or a sister comes to you and says, hey, I noticed something about this. Can I help you with this? It doesn't threaten you because you know that your foundation is Jesus Christ. And so tomorrow night I'm going to talk a little bit about fear of man. Fear of man plays a huge part. It might keep us from going and maybe prefer to just maintain. Keeps us from going and prefers to just maintain. And so we need relationship with God, relationship with others. Well, people get defensive because they feel threatened, because their security is in themselves or material things. So if I don't have a good relationship with someone and Austin comes up to me, I pick on some of you all because I know who you are. Some of you I don't know, so if I don't call on you, don't take it personally. I just don't know who you are as well. Okay. But if Austin would come up to me and we weren't getting along, or we are getting along, it influences one way or another what he then says to me. Because if we don't get along, he says something, well, I'm ready for it, right? I'm thinking about, okay, here he comes. And if we have a relationship, and we have an open communication line per se, he comes up to me, he shares something with me. Yeah, hey, thanks for saying that. I'll have to think about that. And we had an example last night, standing there in a little group, and someone said something about what another person had said. He said, you know what? I needed to hear that at that point in time. I needed to hear that at that point in time. Because I wasn't thinking about them, but when you said that, I had to think back, and that was good for me. I needed that. So if we're defensive and our value is coming from people or from things, okay, then it's a lot harder to be open and have that Colossinite if it's not in God. Any other comments before I keep going?
You asked the question why people can't handle life these days.
Yep. Yep. And I said that people are searching for more. They want more. I think there's also people in our own lives, right? Maybe I suggested this, but I'll talk about koinonia because I think koinonia then gives way to some of this. We have fellowship in the gospel. But yeah. Any other thoughts? Well, the whole story of Christianity is wrapped up in Colossae, okay? The death on the cross. Jesus subjected himself to God's will, right? He said, you know what? You're going to go down to earth, sinful man, as a little baby, and then you're going to grow up, and they're going to pluck your beard. They're going to whip you with whips and make fun of you, spit in your face, put a crown of thorns upon you, and you're going to have to drag across half naked up Golgotha's the road, and then you're going to hang there. And people are going to mock you and say, hey, are you actually God? But Jesus is the ultimate picture of Colossae. It's all wrapped up in Colossae. If you want to remember that as an image of what Colossae is, right there, the picture of the cross. He yielded himself to his Father's will. So that what? We could have salvation, and he could draw all men to him. That is what Colossae is. I didn't give you a whole lot of time, but what are some things we could do, maybe, to help reinforce Colossae amongst each other? What are some things we could do that would reinforce Colossae, or a spirit of yieldedness, spirit of submission to each other, spirit of, hey, I can help you out here or there? What's the first thing? What's the first thing we can do to reinforce the spirit of Colossae? What we must do?
Listen to each other.
Listen to each other, yep. I was thinking even before that. Before we can have it with each other, what must we do? Relationship with God. Okay. We have a very fast-paced society, very fast-paced. And my wife has been talking about our schedule a little bit. We've been talking about it. I've been thinking about it. My children are growing up. It's getting a little busy, and some of you are past that, right? You're done with that maybe stage in life. But it's a fast-paced society. But are we slowing down enough to even hear the voice? We need to have a regular devotional life with Jesus. So if that's not happening, well then that's the starting point. Start there, and then we can go from there. But any other practices or things we can do to reinforce Colossae? I'll just write it up. I call it devotional time, maybe quiet time, or I don't know the phrase you might use for that. What's something else we can do? I mean, I have things written down, but I'll give you an example. And I never asked this brother if he cares if I share this, but I'll just say his name. One of our pastors. I'll just refer to him that way. He had some things going on with his house, and they had to do some work on it. And it was a heavy weight for him, and so he wasn't sure how to deal with this all. And he talked about it a little bit in accountability thing, or our discipleship group, or get-together group. And it was kind of heavy for him. But anyhow, he wasn't sure what to do because what is everyone else going to think? And so they started on the project, and multiple people within the congregation started helping out. And he said at the end of the project, he would not do it again. Okay, it's a lot of work to do a remodel and get rid of mold and whatever else they had going on. He said it was a ton of work, and he would not do it again. But he would never have those conversations with some of those men if he would not have. They offered up their gifts, say, hey, we can do concreting. So they came and did concreting, electrical, and siding, plumbing, and I forget what else that some of the guys did. Never would have had those conversations if that wouldn't have happened. So maybe that's a practical one, right? When you offer up your gifts, you just help each other out. I'm going to say in trades, not in trading things maybe, but if you have a trade or a skill or a gift. Anyone think of one? It's hard to think of when you're sitting on a hard bench too. Should I keep going? I can say them too. Another example maybe I thought of is something that's popular in American culture. but we do not have as high of an ideal for our elderly, okay? Generally speaking, okay? Compared to what our Eastern cultures like Japan, Korea, Asian cultures in general. But I'm assuming at some point the elderly need help. Maybe we could they could put a sign-up sheet in the back, or anyone could put someone put a sign-up sheet in the back, and you could just say, I need help with this. And then it's there, it's open, and then someone can write in their name, I'll help you, or go talk to them, or like, hey, I saw that you have this on the paper, how can I help you do something? Okay, that would be a practical way to reinforce yieldedness. Again, giving of our time, it's a precious thing. What else? Anyone think of something? I'm going to write a help paper, but that sounds bad again. Yeah, a task paper or a job paper.
This isn't really something specific, but I don't think we're going to accomplish that kind of relationship if we don't spend time.
Yep. So I tried to do that a little bit, or mention that when I said, are we getting together? Like, we have a lot of friends and family in the area. Sometimes we don't even have or hang out with the people in our churches maybe, because there's so many people that maybe you went to school with or you live close to. Yeah. Maybe fellowship, I'll call that. I'm not going to spend much time. I want to keep rolling. I want to get the Martyr's Mirror story in tonight. Some other things that maybe could reinforce Gelassenheit, and I do not have a business, so I'll say this first and foremost, but the idea of insurance was mentioned in 1943 at a sermon in Bowmansville after and during World War II as one of the problems that will probably come up in future years in a way that would hinder the development of community. He had given like 5 things, but that one stood out to me. I think limiting of insurance maybe in some ways, okay, it's necessary at times. That's a whole other discussion, but maybe not protecting our assets to the fullest extent, if I can say it that way. And there's insurance for everything nowadays. So no, I don't have insurance on my laptop, so if you drop it, that's all right. But exchanging of assets, I mentioned that. Maybe a cash gift if you know something happened to a family, and we do that, I think, at times, right? Loaning tools to each other. My dad always says, you know what is mine is yours. And there's been times where he said, hey, where's this? I'm away, and he's like, I need that. I was like, oh, man. But as other people's tools, can you give other people's tools? And can they use yours? And vice versa. Regular fellowship with the local body outside of church, working together, placing a higher importance on church life than other pursuits as well, or other friendships, maybe retreats, camping, or other practical ways to build fellowshipping and instructing other saints built in together. I think the brotherly greeting and the brotherly address are 2 practices that we do not want to lose because it reinforces individualism. Don't touch me, I'm not going to touch you, in reference to the address, or the greeting, I should say. Feet washing is one. So you guys can come up with your own too and think about it. But the spirit of Gelassenheit, the ultimate one is Jesus Christ on the cross, but a yieldedness to each other and to God. Got a couple minutes. I'm going to read a story out of the Martyr's Mirror. Leonhard Kaiser, AD 1527. When the believers greatly increased under persecution and the cross, there was in Bavaria a learned priest of the Mass named Leonhard Kaiser, who examined the writings of Zwingli and Luther and also went to Wittenberg, where he conferred with the doctors and commemorated the supper with them. Having returned to Bavaria, he examined the fruits and doctrine of the Anabaptists, as well as of Zwingli and Luther, and joined himself under the cross to the separated cross-bearing church of the Anabaptists in the year 1525, and forthwith continued in his ministry with great power and zeal, undaunted by all the tyranny which arose over the believers in the way of drowning, burning, and putting to death. In the 2nd year of his ministry, Leonhard Kaiser was apprehended at Scharding in Bavaria and condemned by the bishop of Passau and other priests and capitulars, to be burned on Friday before St. Lawrence Day, in August of that same year. Having bound him on a cart, they took him to the fire, the priests going alongside and speaking Latin to him, but he, on account of the people, answered them in German, even as they had refused to speak to him in German before the court, which he had frequently requested. When he came out into the field and was approaching the fire, he, bound as he was, leaned down at the side of the cart and plucked a flower with his hand, saying to the judge, who rode on horseback alongside the cart, Lord Judge, here I pluck a flower. If you can burn this flower in me, you have justly condemned me. But on the other hand, if you cannot burn me and this flower in my hand, consider what you have done and repent. Thereupon the judge and the 3 executioners threw an extraordinary quantity of wood into the fire, in order to burn him immediately to ashes by the great fire. But when the wood was entirely burned up, his body was taken from the fire uninjured. Then the 3 executioners and their assistants built another great fire of wood, which when it was consumed, his body still remained uninjured. Only his hair and his nails were somewhat burnt brown. And the ashes, having been removed from his body, later was found smooth and clear. And the lower in his hand, not withered, or burnt in the least, was the flower. The executioners then cut his body into pieces, which they threw into a new fire. When the wood was burned up and the pieces lay unconsumed in the fire, finally they took the pieces and threw them to the river Inn. This judge was so terrified by this occurrence that he resigned his office and moved to another place. His chief servant, who was with the judge and saw and heard all this, came to us in Moravia, became our brother, and lived and died piously. That it might be not forgotten, our teachers, having recorded this as it came from his own lips, and now cause it to be promulgated, I don't know if I said that right, promulgated, and made known. That's all I have.